Hello and welcome back to the France 24 debate. I'm Annette Young, and it's time for the world to reboot its view of Africa. That was the message to the continent's leaders when US President Barack Obama addressed the African Union this Tuesday. His speech marked the end of a 5-day visit that included an earlier stop in Kenya, the homeland of his late father. But just as much as Obama says the world needs to change its view of Africa, he went on to point out that equally the continent's leaders need to clean up corruption, uphold democratic freedoms, support human rights, and to step down when their terms expire.
I love my work, but under our Constitution, I cannot run again. I can't run again. I actually think I'm a pretty good president. I think if I ran, I could win. But I can't.
But after the clapping finished, will his remarks resonate? Now, joining me here in the studio to discuss about this is Prince Randy Kasu Alam Sogan, the chairman and president of Black Line Rising Investments. Hello. Sheikh Ibn Umar, the former Chadian foreign minister. Michael Kirtley, the producer of the World Memory Film Project and a frequent guest here at the France 24 debate. Nice to see you again, Michael. And from Abuja, Japes Omojua, a Nigerian blogger. And welcome to all of you. Now, let me start by saying that many themes were raised during this speech. But let's start with the obvious, Michael. How can you change a climate of corruption when a number of African leaders still see it as their right to remain in power for the term of their natural life?
Well, I certainly don't think it's President Obama that's going to change that culture with a few speeches. He hasn't really been that involved with the development of Africa since he's been in power compared to his predecessors. But he has given a hope to the African people, I think, and that's maybe the most important legacy that he will leave. And perhaps I see that the speeches that he gave in Kenya and in Ethiopia and at the African Union more as directed towards the African people themselves. If you think about the different themes that he touched upon, which were oppression and gay rights, which obviously is not going to be very, is not going to receive a very strong listening on the part of the African leaders themselves, and women's rights especially. And I think that these different themes that he took upon, and jobs creation, probably were more directed at the people. And so his idea, I think, is because of his background being from Africa, because of the hope that he elicited when he came to power, that in a certain sense that he can change from the grassroots. That's my opinion, because if you noticed in the room at the African Union, there weren't many African Union leaders of state that were present there. So I think changing Africa is certainly, Africa has changed dramatically in the time that he's been in office in one sense, because economically Africa is going through a big boom in many countries in Africa, but it's also changed for the worse, which is in terms of so much more corruption in places that you wouldn't expect it before.
Now, Sheikh, as a former minister of Chad, what did you think of his speech?
First of all, I should remember that back in 2006, the then young Senator Obama came to Kenya and he gave a lecture at the university, and he talked a lot about corruption and bad governance. And the Kenyan government at that time, I think it was under President Kibaki's watch, was very vehement on the, expressing their unease about, and they characterized Obama as an immature young senator, etc. And now when Obama talked about corruption, everybody is applauding, even the heads of state. I think that it's
a difference what 9 years makes.
It is a progress down the line, I think. Even it is only symbolic. I think as Michael has said, it's very important to give hope to the African people, especially the African youth, because the problem with Africa for decades since independence, precisely, it is not that the challenges we have been facing, but the sense that there is some some fatalism about that. How can I say that? Some sort of divine order that you cannot change. It will be always so. So the fact that with Obama and with the very dynamic African civil society also, that the people begin to believe that it is possible to change for the better. It is possible to challenge corruption and violation of human rights. I think it is very, very important and not only in terms of symbolic importance.
Prince Randy, Obama called it the cancer of corruption. Now, you're someone who's clearly involved in business, in investment. He says that this is a problem for foreign investors, that they don't want to invest in a place where there is an issue with corruption. Given your professional experience and clearly as a young person, what do you think about his comments, and do you think they're actually going to resonate with people?
Corruption is a very complex topic. Corruption varies in degrees and in complexity across Africa, depending on the socio-economic reality of the country. What I've seen from my own experience, and also that many studies have demonstrated, is that the poorer a country is, and the more corruption there is. There's a reason for corruption. Corruption is not a hobby that people just have because they feel like it. Corruption is the result of a circumstance. And in many African countries, what we see is that especially there's not enough investment to curb the corruption. So they should be thinking the opposite. Instead of saying, I'm not going to invest in that particular country because I think there's too much corruption, they should do the opposite. They should invest more so that they can create more value and they can create wealth for the average citizen and develop the entrepreneurship, the businesses. And by coming in as foreign investors, they're also forcing the government to implement better institutions and better public policies. This in turn will start changing the corruption curve. So this is what I think we should be doing, is stop saying that I wait for things to get better instead of just going ahead and making the change yourself.
And that's what he was saying, is it's time for people to engage in the political system.
Yes, they have to engage in the political system. Corruption is something that can never be erased completely. I'm sorry to say, but even in developed countries, even in Western world, even in the United States, there's corruption. It exists. We have seen Halliburton sign billions of dollars of contract in Iraq after no WMDs were discovered. So we shouldn't just put Africa in one box and say Africa is full of corruption. Corruption exists on many different levels. It's just that it's more sophisticated and is done in a better way in some parts of the world.
Let me at this point bring in Japheth from Abuja. Now, Obama got a standing ovation today, but many in the audience were in fact the people that he was actually referring to, ageing political leaders. Certainly not young people.
Hello?
Can you hear me, Japheth?
I can hear you. So
yeah, sorry.
You didn't ask a question around that.
Yeah, I was just saying that Obama got a standing ovation today for his speech, and he was making those comments, and the very people he was talking about were there in the audience, ageing political leaders.
They needed to put up a show. They are hosting him, there is host. They needed to make him feel welcome and make him feel good about his speech. These speeches will be made over and again, but we know that reforming the continent, making change happen, goes beyond speeches, it goes beyond conferences, it goes beyond these big men gathering together, either the African Union or whatever on the continent. It's about committing to change. President Obama is in Ethiopia. Ethiopia's internet penetration is less than 2%. And for the ones that can access the internet, there is a system in place that basically helps to control what you can see. Ethiopia is not a free country, but the president of America, which is supposed to be like the freest country in the world, or the agent of freedom, is right there. The president has done his part, I think, by moving around. I don't think he's done enough for the continent. His first time was practically a waste. He didn't really commit. For the second time, he did Empower Africa project. There is the Yali project that is focused on young people. I don't think he did enough, especially based on expectations. But I think it goes beyond speeches and it goes beyond people clapping. There's a lot more to make change happen.
Michael, Japheth was just touching there on a point, the effect of the internet and how that is, having a massive impact on young people across the continent. The idea that they are capable and wanting to sort of seize opportunities, but are being held back by a system.
Well, I think, first of all, there is no doubt that the internet is the biggest, biggest change factor that has existed in Africa over the past 15 years. There is no doubt that, number one, because people actually can see the differences. They can see the difference between countries. They're not just hearing about what goes on elsewhere through a filtered press, for example. They're also seeing all the opportunities that exist out there. I think that also the internet is one of those places in Africa where people can feel relatively free and uncensored. They feel that they can garner ideas and exchange ideas without necessarily the fear of control from the state, or even being listened to from the state. Because in Africa is not always so easy. In some more sophisticated places, it's easier to listen in on what's going on the internet. So I think that the way that the youth is going to perceive that is going to be country by country. I mean, here we have a tendency to talk about Africa as if people were reacting in a block. And the people of Ethiopia, which, as justly was pointed out here, who are living under a very repressive regime and may not be able to respond in the same way, their youth there are not going to be responding in the same way as in Senegal, for example, or as in Benin, where countries that are much more liberal in their approach to politics and to dealing with human rights. Because at the end of the day, the opportunities of people depend on so many different things. Internet and the ability to relate to internet is one of those, but also how people are free within society. Is tribalism, for example, a very important factor in certain societies? Is political access an important factor? And I think that the one big difference in internet is that the young people of Africa today see how the world can be different. As to me, that's the huge opportunity that's presented by the internet.
Why is it that there's not more young people in positions of power?
Well, I think there is many factors behind this phenomenon. First of all, the African tradition. The elderly in African tradition has always held power in our tradition. So that's one thing. Second thing is that the system in Africa, even within the so-called democratic parties in the opposition, it is very hierarchical, and it does not open opportunities for young people to express themselves and to go up the ladder. That is one thing. And the other thing that the African youth on the last 2 decades are fighting mainly for survival. I remember when I was young in the 60s and the 70s in high school, we have scholarship, free books at school, even free vacation ticket, etc. All of this is not existing. To say nothing of the assurance, the guarantee that you have a job immediately after graduating. So the youth in Africa are facing so big pressing challenges that there is little time to think about politics and to say anything of the fact that they think that all the politicians are corrupt and
not forget that the outside world often doesn't want African leaders to change.
There is a divorce between the establishment and the youth.
There's a disconnect, isn't there? And Japeth, what do you say when you hear what Sheikh just had to say about the reasons why there are not more young people in positions of power?
It's not about young people as it is about our society as a whole. There are privileged people and there are underprivileged people. There are young people that are privileged that are in power, and there are much older people that are not privileged that are not in power. What we found in most cases is that some people have built themselves into a powerhouse, a power block, almost like a royalty, and they've amassed the power and they've cornered the power. And what they are able to do is exchange the resources of the state and the power amongst themselves. I think we should focus on expanding participation in policy. We should look beyond just saying democracy, democracy, and ask ourselves, what sort of democracy do we want for Africa? Because the evolution of the continent is different from the evolution of other parts of the world. We practically have jumped technology, for instance. There are a lot of things that others had to go through before they arrived at where they have arrived at. Now in Africa, we've just practically jumped everything. So we need to identify, first of all, there's Africa, and then like someone said, there's 54, 55 countries. We need to identify our peculiarities and try and find out exactly what works for us. But we cannot get carried away by the fact that we now have democracy. I mean, look at what is happening in Burundi. That's supposed to be democracy, right? But is it free? Is it representative? Is it the voice of the people that the president has to run again for the third time? So we need to look at all of these things and look beyond the tokenism of saying you this, you that, or women this or women that. These are critical issues, they are important. But I think that when a society is free, when a society is democratic enough, both the young people, women, and every other person will be represented, and every other person will be able to aspire and actually be able to run their countries.
Prince Randy?
Yes. I'm going to talk from a perspective of someone who's very practical. I've visited 48 countries in Africa out of the 54 that exist. I'm in Africa almost every week. I just came back from Burkina Faso, which we know went through a major uprising as of late, and we have a transitional government now in Burkina Faso, which is on their toes. They are waiting and they are doing the right things and waiting for the election to take place in October. And the decision will be made and they will see how they're going to reorient the country. So we have to look at African countries individually in their specific problematic that they are facing. So in terms of the gentleman in Abuja touched on the fact that there's some elite or some more privileged people or younger people who have more opportunities than others. But that is changing a lot now. It's not always the case anymore because of tools like the internet, but also because of you have a strong diasporan African force, which I am part of, which I incarnate, which is coming back to Africa and demonstrating and showing to our leaders and to the business community that, and even to our traditional leaders as well, because I'm from a royal family and I know a lot about traditional leadership and traditional structure, and even our old, as a former minister was saying earlier, even people who are already from a certain age, who were more rigid before, are now opening up to this new wave of diasporan African, emerging Africans, even on the continent, because they know that the youth is demanding change, and if they don't get the change they want, they will take it by force.
I'm afraid we just have to press the pause button at this point because we're going to just cut away for a short break. I'll be back in a few minutes' time with the second part of our France 24 debate.